Guys, the day is finally here and I can't tell you how excited I am to review this laptop, not only because it is the first AMD Ryzen mobile laptop that I am looking at, but also because it is the first Ryzen mobile laptop from Illegear. Meet the Onyx V Ryzen, a laptop that is extremely interesting for me because it just destroys and throws away almost everything that I have come to expect of laptop performance and more. And you know what? I'm just not gonna waste any more time. Let's get into it with a deep dive into the Illegear Onyx V Ryzen. So who are Illegear targeting with this laptop? Normally I would just say gamers who are looking for a very capable gaming laptop, but in this case I think it's slightly different because to me this laptop does very well at catering towards creators as well. This is because it comes with an AMD Ryzen 7 4800H, which is one of AMD's best mobile chips, and it's packing a beastly 8 cores and 16 threads. This is paired with an Nvidia RTX 2060, 2 sticks of DDR4 3200 RAM for a total of 16GB of dual-channel memory, a 500GB NVMe SSD, a Panda LM156LF-GL 15.6-inch IPS display, an Intel AX200 Wi-Fi 6 chip, and unfortunately, just a 47 Wh battery, which is pretty sad. This makes this laptop similar, if not exactly the same as the XMG Core 15 that Tim of Hardware Unboxed recently looked at, right down to the 120Hz Panda display on the Intel model, though that's not really all that surprising since the ODM for this laptop is also Tongfang. As expected of a laptop of this caliber, the power brick that comes with it is well, pretty much like a brick, with it rated at 19.5 volts at 9.23 amperes, is made by FSP and weighs in at 600 grams. As many people would tell you, it's the insides that count, so let's take a look inside. The Onyx uses a 4 heat pipe solution with 2 heat pipes cooling the CPU and GPU, one dedicated purely to the GPU itself, and another for what looks like the memory and VRMs of the GPU. These are attached to 2 fans in the corner where they exhaust hot air out through the sides and rear of the laptop. Other things to note of while we're inside here is a second slot for an NVMe SSD, and a bit of extra space for if you decided to upgrade to the 63 Wh battery. I honestly wish that this was standard though. The port selection on this laptop is pretty good with an Ethernet jack, a USB 2.0, a headphone and microphone jack on the left, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports and a full-sized SD card slot to the right, and over to the rear, 2 mini display ports, a HDMI port, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type C port, and finally a barrel charging port. The entire laptop has a very minimalistic black look, so it doesn't look very gamery. It's a mix of aluminium and plastic, like the aluminium top lid of the laptop with its shiny metallic Illegear logo, the plastic display frame inside, the aluminium keyboard wrist rest area, and the plastic base. The aluminium bits are a bit prone to dirt and oil marks, but overall I really like the look of the laptop as it has a more subdued, classier, stealthier look, and in terms of dimension it sizes in 359mm wide, 243mm deep, 22mm thick, 25 if you're including the feet, and weighs in at 2 kilograms, which is a bit thicker and heavier than Illegear's website claim of 19mm thick and 1.85 kilograms heavy. Overall build of the laptop feels pretty solid and rigid, and I feel that this is definitely one of Illegear's better built laptops. It does have better build quality, but it still doesn't pass my one-handed opening test, though admittedly it does get quite close to passing it, so maybe next time. We start off first with the display, and this is where the first disappointment comes in. Unlike previous offerings of Illegear, for whatever reason, this time around the Onyx V Ryzen uses a Panda display rather than a display from say BOE or AU Optronics. While it is an IPS display with a 120Hz refresh rate, the color accuracy is pretty bad. According to my research, it only covers about 56% of the sRGB color space, and using it, I found that there was a very noticeable tint issue where the left of the panel looked a little bit more purplish, whereas the right would look greenish, most noticeable when I'm on Google Docs where both sides of the screens are supposed to be white. There's some pretty bad backlight bleed on the bottom left of the panel as well that just looks really bad, and I also found that reading grey text on a white background difficult as it would look a bit washed out and pale, and it would crush greys to a near black. I brought this up with Illegear, and the good news is that I heard that there will be an option for the usual better 144Hz 100% sRGB panel from BOE. Other things to note of is that it also really doesn't get bright enough, making outdoor use pretty much near impossible, but at least it does get quite dim, which makes using it in a dark room actually not too bad. Moving lower, there is the Illegear logo below the display, and right below that is the webcam. A blue light comes on beside it to let you know that it's in use. But being at the bottom means that it's a nostril-facing webcam, and I have my reservations about this. I mean, it's good that we even have one at all, even if the video and microphone quality are pretty subpar. The keyboard has recently been a point of contention for me on Illegear machines, but I'm happy to say that the typing experience on the Onyx V Ryzen is good, and even better than my personal Raven SER, as the actuation force needed is lighter and has tactile clicks to it. It's a full-sized keyboard including the numpad, which I like, and they're also RGB backlit if you didn't notice it already, and are customizable via the Illegear software with 5 brightness steps including off altogether. The touchpad is nice and smooth, it's pretty big, it transitions pretty smoothly to the body of the laptop, it's pretty solid with minimal rattling and has some pretty nice tactile clicks. Just like the Raven, you can tap the corner of the touchpad to disable it. Last bit before we move on, the power buttons and LED indicators. I say power buttons in plural because the left button actually switches between your power profiles with an LED to reflect this, and the main power button that lights up when the laptop is on. Beside these, you also find the charging light and the caps lock indicator here, and again, while I am fine with the caps lock indicator here, I would have preferred the charging indicator visible even if the laptop was closed. Onto software. As per Illegear standards, it's pretty bare bones Windows aside from the Illegear command center, where you can change some settings, customize the RGB of the keyboard, change the power profiles, and just monitor the system's performance, and THX spatial audio for PCs, where you can configure the audio equalizer for the laptop. Out of the box, without changes to the default speaker settings, what I found was that the Onyx V Ryzen was capable of getting really loud, but was severely lacking in bass response, and while it's generally fine if you're listening to content on maybe YouTube, or maybe, not so bass heavy music, if you're anything like me and you enjoy listening to EDM or playing games, your music is going to sound pretty flat, and games are really going to lack that oomph, Just have a listen to the shotgun in Doom.
I have located the precious signal that will mark it on your HUD.
Now, talking about Doom, I think makes it a perfect time to touch on this really weird thing about this laptop, the RTX 2060 GPU. Now, it works and benches perfectly fine, but when I tried to update the GPU drivers, because I noticed it was using a fairly old version of the drivers, version 442.94, the first thing that I tried to do was use GeForce Experience. Now, I know for a fact that there are newer drivers out there, so when GeForce Experience told me that my drivers were up to date, something felt a bit off. I tried downloading the official notebook drivers from the Nvidia website, and that turned out to be a bust as well, as it didn't find any compatible hardware. I tried again, this time with NV Cleanstall by TechPowerUp, and I ended up with the same issue. In the end, I did manage to update the laptop to the latest Nvidia drivers, but by using NV Cleanstall's Add Hardware Support feature, using my Raven SER's RTX 2060 as a template and setting the device ID to 1F15. Since I get to name my custom drivers, I decided to have a little fun with it, and so I made the RTX 2060 a super rare, super powerful, not yet released graphics card, and of course, it had to be NDA. I wait for it to do its thing and then install the drivers as per usual, and once it's done, I check it out in Device Manager and oh yeah. Anyway, on a more serious note, my guess is that this is happening because the hardware inside is a little different, or it's just too new that it isn't yet supported by Nvidia. Well, just yet. I did talk to Illegear's rep about this, and they pretty much told me the exact same thing, that it's too new and it's not out yet. The drivers will probably come out in time, but yeah, in the meantime, you can't just install the official drivers without messing around with it a little. That aside, we move on to the performance aspect of things, and there's a lot of things to cover because not only is this the first Ryzen mobile machine that I am benchmarking, it is also very different from any of the other laptops that I have heard or read about before. Well, now that I've seen the hardware unboxed one, not really, because that one's similar. Yeah, so yeah, strap yourselves in because it's about to get interesting, but also a bit technical. Let's start with things I didn't realize until late into my testing period, and it starts back with the Illegear Command Center application. Now, within the Command Center, you can set the power profiles of the machine with things like Office Mode, Game Mode, and Turbo Mode. I usually don't pay much attention to this and just set it to Turbo Mode for when I'm testing, but here's where it gets interesting, and let me break it down for you. Even though there are what looks like only 3 power states to choose from here, there are actually 5. There's Office Mode Eco, Office Mode, Game Mode, Turbo Mode, and Turbo Mode CPU Power Boost. These are all listed in ascending order of power configurations, and what I mean by that is that each power configuration mode runs the CPU at different power targets. Office Eco runs the CPU at a sustained 25 watts with boosts up to 30 watts, Office at 45 watts with boosts to 65 watts, Game Mode at 54 watts with boost to 65 watts, and Turbo Mode is exactly the same, at least for the CPU because the GPU clocks higher in Turbo Mode. Now, this is the part where it gets a bit crazy. If you enable Turbo Mode with CPU Power Boost, the CPU boosts all the way up to 73 watts, guys. And not only that, it will even try to sustain it at close to 73 watts. Let me just remind you that based on AMD's official spec sheet, the Ryzen 7 4800H by default is configured to 45 watts, but vendors can customize this to either a lower 35 watts TDP or a higher 54 watts TDP, depending on the machine that they're designing it for. In fact, most if not all vendors that I know of will just choose to run it at a default 45 watts consistently, which is pretty normal. This laptop not only runs the entire configurable spectrum, but also beyond it at pretty much 25 watts to 73 watts, guys. That's 35% more power delivery than AMD's recommended official specs. This has big implications when I'm performing my benchmarking, as in Cinebench R20, running the 73 watts turbo CPU boost mode. The CPU scored an epic 4500 multi-core and 482 single core. While the single core score isn't really affected by the power profiles, the multi-core score puts it higher than most 4800H systems out there. We see the same thing in the Blender BMW benchmark, where while the 4800H configured at a stock 45 watts is already giving out a killer score, at 73 watts it's just crazy and starts saving you massive amounts of time and just leaves the competition in the dust. Uncle Ben once said to Peter Parker though, with great power comes great responsibility, and in this case you can substitute great responsibility with great heat output. This graph taken during the BMW Blender benchmark shows how the 4800H performs when configured to 54 watts. Even at AMD's highest TDP spec, the system manages to keep it all respectably cool with temperatures maxing out at only 76 Celsius. Now here's a graph running the same test, except this time with the 4800H running at 73 watts, and while we can see that the system does run at a higher frequency, the temperatures start hitting the 95 to 96 Celsius mark very quickly, making it very toasty. To be fair, even at this setting, it still isn't thermal throttling, as the thermal limits for this CPU is 105 Celsius, and on other Intel-based laptops, it isn't uncommon to see the CPU running up to 95 Celsius, hitting their thermal limits and throttling the CPU down. The moment we start hitting both the CPU and GPU at the same time though, things really started to heat up, and while the results of Crytek's CryEngine Neon Noir ray tracing benchmark were really good, if not one of the best scores I've seen on a laptop, the moment that I started playing a real game on it, the laptop got hot, like really hot. While playing Doom Eternal under the turbo profile, the CPU hits a toasty 94 Celsius, with even occasional spikes up to 104 Celsius. The RTX 2060 GPU also hit the thermal limit during this period with a temperature of 85 degrees Celsius. The laptop got very noticeably hot and uncomfortable during this time, with temperatures on the body and the keyboard hovering and even exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. I started testing with different power profiles, and what I noticed is that if you want more reasonable temperatures, then you can switch the laptop's power profile to, hear me out here, Office Eco Mode. This is because aside from turbo mode, which does run the GPU faster, I did not notice any changes or drops in the FPS, and gameplay remained extremely smooth, with the CPU running at about 86 Celsius and the GPU running at about 81 to 82 Celsius with no thermal throttling. What is also really interesting is how even with the same graphics card, the 4800H Onyx V Ryzen got higher and more consistent frame rates versus my 9750H machine, which means that, yeah, you're going to get a better gaming experience on Ryzen Mobile with higher, more consistent FPS than on the Intel Core mobile lineup. Noise levels while gaming were also not too bad. It's definitely audible but never got irritating or unbearable. If you're looking for lower noise levels when gaming, then you'd definitely benefit from running the laptop on the Office Eco profile as well. Battery life is where it falls completely flat on its face though. I will admit that I had high hopes for this chip, especially after reading and studying on other laptops with Ryzen 4000 processors inside of them, and while those machines can reach upwards of 10 hours of runtime, the Onyx V Ryzen only lasted 2 hours and 30 minutes while typing up this review in Google Docs and listening to music on YouTube. Granted, it only has a 47 Wh battery, but I expected more out of it. I'm not sure if it's something that they can fix via a firmware or BIOS update, since even while typing this review up on it, it does feel pretty noticeably warm, but you know, one can hope. Alright, let's bring things to a close on the Illegear Onyx V Ryzen, and I don't think I can do that without talking about the price. This configuration that I have here will set you back 4,843 ringgit, or about 1,142 US dollars, and within Malaysia, the only other alternative is the Asus TUF A15, and that system is more expensive and has some of its own issues. Just Google it. In my opinion, the Onyx V Ryzen gets a lot of things right, like a solid metal build, a robust port selection, a pretty good keyboard and trackpad, and fantastic performance, but it's not perfect as well because the display is pretty terrible, honestly. The temperatures could have been a bit better, and 2 hours and 30 minutes of battery life is just sad, but it's not as if we're getting a lot more on competing Intel systems. In fact, the compute power on this laptop I feel isn't really comparable to its Intel counterparts, because while I feel like those are still, yeah, you know, it's a laptop mobile class chip, laptops with Ryzen Mobile straight up feel like desktop class chips and just redefines what we've come to expect out of mobile computing performance, and that seriously excites me. Because of that, if it was me and I was looking for a very versatile gaming laptop with some definite chops for creator workloads, if you change out that display for something better, then I think the Onyx V Ryzen is seriously one of my top picks for a really powerful bang for buck option, and I can easily recommend it. If Illegear really fixes those couple of things, I'm confident that they have a winner on their hands. Ryzen Mobile really is such a game changer in terms of performance, and honestly, I'm pretty excited to check out more laptops packing these chips. If you guys are interested in getting one of this, well, the Onyx V Ryzen, then I will drop a comment in the description down below. It sends a small kickback my way and helps me to maintain the channel. As usual, if you like this video, give it a like, share it, drop any of your comments down below. Consider subscribing to me if you're not already subscribed, and click the bell icon so that you don't miss any of my new videos as soon as they come out. My name is Yang, the Tech Rodent, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Oh, and before you guys go as well, let me know what you guys think about this new setup, this kind of filming, the lights, everything. I'm just trying this out. Let me know if you like it. Now you can go.